Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to introduce here Will Tuttle, the author of the World Peace Diet, and he's here with us in Lahaina Jodo Mission. We are having a lecture today, and we have several questions to ask him. And the very first question is, what is the message of your book, The World Peace Diet?
Thanks, Anna, and
Thank you,
everyone for watching. The main message of the World Peace Diet is that all of us are born into a society where we're compelled from the time we're little infants to participate in mealtime rituals that are not in our best interest. We're eating typically not only vegetables and fruits and grains, but also the flesh of animals who are terribly treated, and this is not good obviously for the animals and also not good for our own health, as well as for the health of our environment and our society. And I also in the World Peace Diet go into the psychological and spiritual dimension of this, and not just the flesh of these animals, but also dairy products and eggs, that these are the products of extreme abuse of animals, sexual abuse, confinement, killing of mothers, stealing of babies. You know, it goes on a massive scale by the millions every day actually in our society, and we're taught essentially that this is good food for good people, that we need to kill and imprison animals in order to get adequate protein, to get adequate calcium. And the good news is that this is not true. And I've been a vegan, what's called a vegan. I'm basically someone who's not eating any animal-based foods or wearing or buying products that cause the suffering of animals for nearly 37 years, since 1980. And I can say from my own experience and the experience of literally millions of people who live in a similar way that our health is as good or probably much better than the average person. I'm now in my mid-60s and still haven't gone to doctors in 40 years and been very healthy. And in general, people who eat a plant-based diet have much lower risk of the diseases that are basically filling up our hospitals. So the message is really a message of good news, that we live on an abundant planet, that we can feed everyone easily on this planet on much less land than we're using, because animal agriculture is very inefficient in its use of resources, causing a lot of suffering to animals and disease. And so the good news is that we can thrive on a plant-based diet using less resources, less water and petroleum, less methane and nitrous oxide, really reduce the global climate destabilization, reduce rainforest destruction and water depletion and water pollution, and really reduce ocean destruction. And the problem is, though, that we're raised in a society where we're forced to participate in these mealtime rituals, where we learn to refuse this gift we've been given, a gift that we've all been given of a physical body that does not require any animal to suffer to get all the nutrients that we need to thrive and celebrate our lives here. I think once we understand that we don't need to imprison any animals, it's completely unnecessary. We don't need to feed them. We don't need to cut down rainforest to grow genetically engineered soybeans and corn to feed them. We can allow habitat to replenish, and we can stop the mass extinction of species. This is all dependent really on moving from eating animal foods to plant-based foods. And it's something that we can learn about and we can implement in our daily lives, and we can encourage other people to do. So the World Peace Diet is essentially about world peace, because food shortages are the direct cause of conflict and war, the direct cause of disease and environmental devastation. All of these are contributing to disharmony and conflict in our world, and that we can be much happier psychologically and I would say spiritually and ethically by reducing our footprint, our environmental footprint, our abuse footprint, you know, to just abuse less animals, fewer animals, and cause less suffering. And we've been, like I said, we've been doing this for years, and right now we're at the very end, the last day actually of a 65-day worldwide lecture tour sharing this message in Asia and Europe, and it's been fantastic. Yeah, India, and to just see how people are waking up out of the cultural trance of abusing animals.
Those are beautiful news.
Yes, it's very good news.
Very good. What motivated you to write this awesome book?
The main motivation really for me is basically, you know, we have this list, you know, everyone knows the list, a list of problems. We have hunger and poverty and injustice and environmental devastation and disease and, you know, and global warming, all these problems that we're facing as human beings. And on that list, somewhere, everyone agrees, is human abuse of animals. But basically, human abuse of animals is very low on the list for most people because most people feel that our human problems are more important. We'll solve those first, and when we get around to it, we'll try to be nicer to animals. I wrote the World Peace Diet basically to take human abuse of animals and take it from the bottom of the list and put it at the very top of the list, that it is the most suffering. We cause literally incalculable suffering to trillions, actually, if you include aquatic animals. Every year we kill them, we mutilate them, cause just enormous suffering to them. So that's the greatest amount of suffering. But more than that, the actual practice of animal agriculture, of imprisoning them and eating their flesh and secretions, actually causes all the other problems directly or indirectly. And it creates, beyond that, which I really wanted to emphasize, it creates a mindset, a whole set of attitudes that reduce our intelligence and our empathy and our capacity to solve these problems. So if we're going to keep eating animals on the outer world, animal agriculture is causing the actual environmental devastation, hunger, injustice, war, and so forth that we're actually having to deal with. But even more severely, in a sense, it's causing the mindset of domination and exploitation and disconnectedness and might makes right, and the domination of the feminine, sacred feminine dimension of life, and the killing of mothers and stealing of babies. You know, this violence and abuse of others and the objectification of others and the materialism where we learn to see everything as a commodity. We see forests not as trees, but as board feet of lumber. You know, we see animals not as beings, but as just objects to be used. And that mentality is the driving force behind the actual inability that we have to effectively deal with the problems that we're having. It creates an economic system based on injustice and domination. Corporate capitalism basically is a direct result of animal agriculture. So if we want to actually be effective in solving our problems, that's why I wrote the World Peace Diet, to show the world that there is a way to do it. There's an absolute way, there's a path to a doorway that leads to a beautiful world for us and for our children. And people don't realize that there's a path. It's right there. We can take it right now. Each one of us individually and as a society, we can do it. There's nothing stopping us. It's wide open. It's there. It just means we have to change what we're eating and how we think about what we're eating. We're not eating a what, we're who we're eating. Then it's a being we're eating. And to not see them as just a thing, but to see them as a being and then come home to our natural empathy and wisdom and treat them as a being. And when we do that, we free them. And only by freeing them will we ever free ourselves. As long as we have these millions of animals in our hands and we say we're going to crush you and destroy you for no reason at all. I mean, there's no need to it for it at all. And when we do that, we crush our own possibilities for happiness and for peace. And unfortunately, I think it's becoming obvious that if we don't wake up out of animal agriculture, we will go extinct, and we'll cause the other animals to go extinct, and we won't even know why it happened. And that's why I wrote the World Peace Diet. It's an urgent call to awake up humanity to what you're doing. If we were the ones born as cows and pigs and chickens, we wouldn't need to be, we would understand this. Since we're born as the dominators and the exploiters, we conveniently don't see it. But we don't have that convenience anymore. The truth is that as we abuse and imprison them, we are abusing and imprisoning ourselves, and our own children bear the brunt of this, really. They're not going to have a world. So there's a sense of urgency, but also a sense of joy in realizing that we live on a beautiful, abundant planet that can support all of us, that the animals can live their lives freely, we can live our lives freely, eating meat, dairy products, eggs. It's really the burgers, the hot dogs, the fish sticks, the cheese, the eggs. That is the problem. As long as you want to eat, those are not benevolent foods. Those are extremely malevolent, violent, devastating foods. And they're not foods. They're toxic, essentially.
Yeah, so how do our food choices affect us mentally, spiritually, and physically?
Food choices affect us mentally, physically, and spiritually in a variety of ways. And I'm going to keep it short. I could really talk a long time about this. Animal foods concentrate toxins. There are three main kinds of toxins. One is the sheer physical toxins, all the PCBs, dioxins, nuclear radiation, heavy metals, PCB, arsenic, mercury, all of the toxins that we produce industrially and through mining and through nuclear power, everything. It ends up eventually in the water. So if we're eating fish, we're eating animals that concentrate in their flesh these toxins hundreds of thousands or millions of times more in their bodies than in the water. Fish are being fed not only to other fish and factory farm fish. 2/3 of the fish we're eating are factory farmed. The fish are also fed to cows and pigs and chickens to boost milk and meat production. All the crops that are sprayed, they're genetically engineered. They're doused with all kinds of glyphosate and many other toxic chemicals. They concentrate in the flesh of animals. Also, there's over 10,000 different drugs and hormones that are approved to be used on animals. They're being injected with hormones and drugs and antibiotics. All that ends up in the flesh. So if we're eating animal flesh, we're getting a huge dose of physical toxins. That's number one. Number two are the naturally occurring toxins in animal foods. Animal foods contain saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying, and inflammatory animal protein. These are toxic for us to eat. Also, naturally occurring hormones like estrogen, naturally occurring carcinogens like casein, the main protein in milk. We are not little dairy cows, little cows. We do not have renin like calves have to digest the main protein in milk, which is casein, so it causes all kinds of problems. I myself had an appendicitis. It's well understood that most of the childhood problems that we have are due to dairy. We're not calves, we're human beings. We're not equipped to eat dairy products. Eggs have the most concentrated cholesterol on the planet, so there's naturally occurring toxins that are very harmful to us, and it's understood now that eating animal foods is the driving force behind the proliferation of breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, heart disease, liver disease, kidney disease, diverticulitis, autoimmune diseases, dementia, basically what's filling up our hospitals. And so, but the third dimension also I think is important to understand, which is the metaphysical toxins. We're eating, besides these physical toxins, we're eating terror and fear and pain and grief and despair and sadness and anger and frustration. Do we really want to build this beautiful temple that we have, our one temple, to celebrate our lives on this earth with bricks of misery and pain and give that to our children? So that's what it does on the physical level. Psychologically and spiritually, it's even, in a sense, worse, because we're talking about eating attitudes. And we're eating foods that are toxic, but attitudes that are toxic, and there's many of them. I talk about probably a dozen of them in the World Peace Diet. I'll just list three. One is an attitude of disconnectedness. Every meal is teaching us at a very deep ritualized level, because meals are rituals. They're the most powerful ritual in any society. When people get together and eat food, we're not just eating food, we're eating a whole worldview of our society's view of its relationship with nature and animals and with each other and with the cosmos. So we're eating an attitude of disconnectedness with every meal, that we just don't look deeply, we don't feel deeply, we don't care deeply, because we're just eating the flesh and secretions of terribly abused animals, and we would not want to think about that. We don't want to look deeply or care deeply or listen deeply into the suffering that we're eating. So we learn with every meal to not ask questions, to stay shallow, to just pretend that everything's okay. And when we create a whole society of people like that, we create a society of people who are easily manipulated by the mass media, easily manipulated by governments, easily manipulated by advertisers. We buy the products they tell us to buy. We believe the stories they tell us to believe. And what veganism is essentially is just say, look, question things, look deeply, care deeply, try to find out, where does your food come from actually? What's going on behind the curtain? Find out. Liberate yourself and be conscious and aware. That's one of the attitudes. Another attitude is might makes right. Now, the subtext of every meal is that the strong dominate the weak. The strong exploit the weak. We are stronger than animals. We just use them. We hyper-confine them, we abuse them, we mutilate them, we just do horrific things to them because we have the power to do that. And so, again, how can we expect to create a society where peace, justice, equality are possible when every meal is teaching us the exact opposite of that? It's teaching us privilege and elitism, and that the strong dominate and exploit the weak with every meal. It's ridiculous to expect that we can ever have an end to racism or sexism or classism when every meal is teaching us to dominate and exploit and to see others as commodities to be used. The third aspect that's very important to also be aware as far as attitudes is that animal agriculture is not just humans dominating animals. It's more accurately, it's men dominating female animals. It's really about the sexual abuse of millions of animals to steal their babies and steal their milk and steal everything from them, their purposes, their lives, their sovereignty, and use them sexually and break the bond between the mother and the child. And the mother and the child bond That's the foundation of sanity and health in our society. If we as little babies do not get a loving mother, we're not going to be healthy on any level, psychologically, physically, ethically, but that's what happens. We break that bond in animals and it boomerangs back, and we create societies where that bond is being broken for us, and we have more and more problems because of this. So the whole idea is to realize that our health, our physical health, psychological health, cultural health, depend on being kind and loving to others. It's what every religion has taught us. Do not do to others what you would not want done to yourself. I mean, that's a universal teaching. But with animal agriculture, we break it over and over again in respect to beings who are as absolutely sentient as we are. Cows, pigs, chickens, all mammals, fishes are self-aware. This is well understood. They are conscious. They are the subjects of their lives. They look out of their eyes. They want to avoid pain. They want to fulfill their purposes. When we don't let them do that, we imprison them, hyper-confine them, and literally drive them into insanity, which is what we do. Pigs are banging their head against the cages. Chickens are pecking each other's eyes out. Pigs are biting each other's tails off. We drive them into insanity. How can we expect that we'll be sane when we drive these animals? You know, it's what Krishnamurti said. He said it's not a good idea to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think what we're talking about is simply to not be well adjusted to a society based on violence and abuse of other animals, to create an alternative based on kindness and respect, and that's what we're working for, and that's what's happening. I think we see more and more people questioning the violence and seeing that we can feed everyone delicious, healthy meals that make us feel good on every level that are plant-based.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what is the healthiest choice in food, the healthiest diet?
The healthiest diet, I think, for us today is obviously it's based on plant-based, as much as possible, organic. In other words, pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides and chemical fertilizers are harmful to birds and butterflies and fishes and so forth. So try to not use GMOs and toxic chemicals and so forth. So organic, and I would say if we can go beyond organic to what's referred to as veganic, so we're not using bone meal and blood meal and manure and so forth. And then local community-based agriculture as much as possible, to support local farmers markets, support local growers, become more self-sufficient with food, become more self-sufficient with energy, become more self-sufficient in our community relations, grow our own food. I think everyone can grow something. We can grow a few tomatoes, cucumbers, a few sprouts on the counter, you know, something. We can start growing our own food, supporting those who are doing that. And we can see, we've seen these YouTube videos of people that have half an acre or a quarter of an acre in LA, and they're producing 20 or 30,000 pounds of food, you know, every year. We can grow enormous amounts of food in small spaces, and we can have orchards and beautiful places. So to use love and caring as our way of getting food, and to eat foods that are whole and unprocessed as much as possible, because we don't want to be eating a lot of artificial chemicals and colors and flavorings. So whole, local, or organic or veganic, whole plant-based foods are a wonderful foundation for health, and they're less expensive, and we can all just move in that direction as best we can.
How do our food choices affect the earth, the planet, the animals, the plants, and the human beings?
The food choices that we make a huge difference. So if someone says, people think this sometimes, they say, well, I'm just one person, I'm not making a difference. I mean, one person makes a difference. If we're eating, when I take out my wallet, that's where I make the difference. You know, the wallet is the voting booth. I take out my wallet and take out my money and pay for something, I'm voting for something. And when whatever we're voting for together will happen. So like I've already said, if we're voting for animal-based foods, we're voting for a system that is utterly devastating. We're cutting down rainforests at the rate of an acre per second right now. That's to grow soybeans, to feed to imprison cows and pigs and chickens and fishes. So we can vote for something else. So I think, you know, just to see, as I've been saying, we can, each one of us, move to living in a way that is much more sustainable, much more healthy. And the underlying idea, I just heard, we were just in China for 3 weeks bringing this message to the Chinese people in mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And one of the things that I heard them say, which I think is really true, that one individual step by many individuals creates a huge leap for all of humanity. And I think that's the thing. We have to realize that each one of us is an individual. When we make a step and we encourage others to make a step, together we make a step that is a wonderful leap in a positive direction for all of us, and we can all make an effort to understand these ideas and act in accordance with these ideas.
Why don't we hear more about these kind of ideas?
Well, I would say the main reason that we don't hear more about these ideas is that there's two reasons. One is that the powers that be, in a sense, I refer to this as the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, financial complex. And it's this complex of large transnational corporations and financial institutions and media companies and so forth. The system of animal agriculture works very well to concentrate an enormous amounts of wealth in the hands of a tiny, wealthy elite that controls the media and controls the information that we're getting. My father owned a whole chain of newspapers. I learned early on that you do not run news stories that the advertisers don't like. So the advertisers, the corporations, they're paying for the media, so we're not getting that message. And so it's very important for us to make an effort to get this on our own. So the reason, to answer your question, we don't hear more about this is that, number one, there's powerful forces, especially the pharmaceutical medical complex, that do not want us to know about this. Number two, though, is that the people themselves, most of us who are eating animal foods, we'd rather not know also. That's the hard part. Most of the average person would, if I say, would you like to know where your bacon comes from? They say, no, don't tell me, I don't want to know, I want to enjoy my bacon, just don't tell me.
Right.
So that's why it's difficult, yeah.
Yeah. So what can each of us do today to help in this vegan movement?
I think the main thing each individual can do is really just to make an effort to understand if what I'm saying is true. Just find out, to make an effort to understand the consequences of animal agriculture, find out what it does to our health, find out what it does to our environment, find out what it does to animals, find out what it does to our psychology and spirituality and to our culture. I've written a book called The World Peace Diet, which is, to me, the best resource to actually find out what's happening. And you can go to the resources in The World Peace Diet and take it deeper. But it's based on absolutely the best science, not only the best science, but also the ancient wisdom teachings. All agree. It's wonderful to see that the ancient wisdom teachings of Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and really the great sages and saints of the Western tradition as well have all understood that a foundation of a healthy society is kindness and respect for other beings. Science is showing that a foundation of health for us, for our physical bodies, is also the same foundation of kindness and respect to other animals. And we see this now from the point of view of our culture, of our environment. I was just in China, where the government is actually mandating that everyone in China reduce the amount of meat they're eating by half, because the Chinese scientists are logical. They can see very clearly that animal agriculture is destroying their aquifers, it's sucking a lot of water, it's cutting down forests, it's destroying their ecology, it's bad for the health of the people. So they're telling people, look, eat less meat. I mean, why? When I would say to them, I wish the government of the United States was as wise as the government of China, they'd all clap, And I wish, why doesn't our government, because, we all know, politics is very corrupt and with money, and so that's why I think what we're talking about is a grassroots movement. So each one of us can make an effort to understand these ideas and then share these ideas with other people. Embody the ideas, yeah.
What do you mean with benevolent evolution?
What I mean by a benevolent evolution is that, or a benevolent revolution I sometimes call it, is this change that we're talking about. To just make an effort to understand the consequences of animal agriculture, bring our lives into alignment with that understanding, move to a plant-based way of living for ethical reasons, share these ideas with others and be creative, and be part of a very benevolent and positive change on this earth. It's not about criticizing or blaming or shaming anyone. It's really just about understanding the consequences and then in a positive way create an alternative that makes the old obsolete way of living obsolete. And it is obsolete. So we see vegan restaurants, we see vegan newspapers like this wonderful Living Aloha magazine here on Maui. We see vegan, all kinds of vegan meetup groups.
Vegan farmers markets.
Vegan farmers markets. And we see, we see books and CDs and films. I recommend seeing Cowspiracy and What the Health and other films and YouTubes. And just get educated and spread this to other people in a loving, respectful way.
In your book, you were talking about the domination of the feminine. Could you explain a little about that? Yeah,
the domination of the feminine, as I already have said, is really the foundation of animal agriculture. And when we dominate animals, I refer to this, the sacred feminine dimension, which is in animals as well as in us, as Sophia. Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom, And I think it's this inner wisdom that all of us have, whether we are men or women. I think women have it even a little stronger because women give birth to babies and know that feeling of loving this little being, even if she's a lot of trouble, or he, and caring. And I think, you know, this natural wisdom that we all have to love and protect and nurture life, unfortunately, is suppressed and hardened and just repressed by our society when we force little kids to eat animal foods, when we force them to live in a society based on dominating animals, where we don't talk about these issues, where animals become sexualized objects and women become sexualized objects, and you know, violence pervades the system. So essentially what veganism is, I think, is the resurrection of the sacred feminine to create a society of compassion and kindness for all of us.
Do you think the future of humanity is bright?
I don't know if the future of humanity is bright, actually. I think on some level that we don't know. But I do have a good feeling that, you know, as I have said, as we've been traveling, I think the vegan movement is really growing quickly. There's also a feeling of technologies that are very positive as well as technologies that are very negative. I think it's really, in a sense, sounds like a race against time. Will we be able to wake up before we implode? And I think the most important thing is, even though we don't know what the future is, that each one of us today and tomorrow and each day when we get up in the morning, we can give thanks for another day, to do our best, to try to do our part to make a bright future for humanity and for all beings.
Thank you, Will. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Anna.
And we will see you shortly for the conference, for the lecture here at the Lahaina Jodo Mission. And thank you, the TV station, for being with us today. Okay, namaskar.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Namaskar. Thank you so much for coming this beautiful, beautiful evening here in Lahaina. Thank you for all the parents and children. It's so beautiful to see so many vegan kids. Oh, it tells us that the future of humanity is bright. With those beautiful, beautiful vegan children that we have with us. So the blood is being renewed here. So tonight, guess who we have? Who do we have tonight? We have Tuttle tonight. And I would like to tell you a little about him. He's an educator, a composer, a pianist, and a writer. And he's the author of the international bestseller, The World Peace Diet, published in 16 languages. Here we are. Oh, an applause, round of applause for the most beautiful people ever. Yeah. Thank you. Very nice. And it's in 16 languages. Is it in Spanish? Is it in Spanish? Yeah. If not, I'll translate it for you. All right. So what else do we have? Peace activist, vegan for 37 years. I know, a long time, huh? Very good. How old are you?
11.
How old are you? How many years have you been vegan?
About 1. I was vegetarian for the rest of my life, though.
And you? How old are you?
8. 9.
How long have you been vegan?
The same amount.
The same. Wow. Isn't that amazing? I want to ask you, how long have you been vegan?
I've been vegan for just 1 year, but vegetarian for 23 years, which is not as good, but I found my path.
That's great, awesome. Good. Let me see what we have here. Recipient of the Courage of Concierge Award and the Empty Cage Award. Creator of the World Peace Diet Training Program. PhD from UC Berkeley, focusing on educating intuition and altruism. Has taught college courses in philosophy, humanities, mythology, and cooperative religion. Former Zen monk and Dharma master in the Korean Zen tradition. Co-founder of the worldwide prayer circle for animals. I'm currently conducting a music, art, and educating ministry with his spouse, Madeline, a visionary artist from Switzerland. So we have a lot of books for sale, a lot of CDs for sale. Please visit us in the back after the conference. And I give the phone to Will Tuttle.
Thank you. Anna, before you sit down, can you just tell us, unless you already did, the names of everyone who helped provide that food?
Well, we have to give a big thank you to all our beautiful chefs. When you become a vegan, you become a chef. There's no other way. No other way to survive. You have to become a chef. So here we have the first chef, Eric Mas. Can you stand up, please? He's very nice. He's the beautiful author of the vegan banana bread. Where can you find our breads? Where can we find the bread?
Haley Farmers Market. The Haley Farmers Market, Wednesdays and Saturdays.
So,
8 to 12.
awesome. Then we have Choice. Can you stand up, little people from Choice? Stand up! Round of applause for Choice. Choice Health Bar. They donated the massage kale. Was it yummy? Was it? Yes. Awesome. Then we have Roots. Well, somebody stand up for Roots. Supravat. Roots send the food, but we put some volunteers. Good. Then prasad. You know what prasad means? Yoga instructors. What does prasad mean? Divine food. Yeah, divine food. Food that is good for your mind, good for your body, good for your soul. So, Goldine. Oh, she has to go. Okay. Very good. Okay, so that's prasad. Then we have the lemonades from Robert and Ashley. Stand up, Robert and Ashley, stand up. And then we have the sweet cane juice from James Simpliciano. Stand up. Up we go. Then we have the delicious jackfruit. Have you tried the jackfruit? Yeah. Ooh, with? Come on, I see your face. I see through the corner of my eyes. Come in. From the chef, Cameron, the breadfruit. How do you say breadfruit in Hawaiian? How do you say breadfruit? Good. Am I forgetting something? Anything? Napili Farmers Market, bringing the, what is called? The spread. The macadamia nut spreads. The Italian, the Greek, the Indian, the Green Supreme, and the Mexican. Did you try all of them? Yeah, they were in the focaccia bread. Thank you. Oh, and here we have Dorian. She worked all afternoon to do that. Thank you, Dorian. Was it hard work?
Oh, it was wonderful to give.
All right, very good. Dorian helped a lot with the focaccia bread. So, there we go. Am I forgetting anybody? Oh, Aloha. Dean and Aloha, come. Round of applause for Dean and Aloha. Aloha raw food, very delicious. And Aloha was bringing her tea. She's an expert in tea. She even goes to China, Beijing and China, yeah. And she brings all this beautiful, delicious tea. So I hope you had a chance to enjoy her teas, and then it's mayonnaise, but it's not mayonnaise. It's mayonnaise, but it's not mayonnaise. What is the name? Tell me. So tell your products. What are your products?
The name is the Maui-ness, and we have a line of probiotic crowds locally made on Maui to help people with the probiotic culture, because we believe that the culture internal will represent itself as external culture very soon. So the more culture we eat, and the more culture we become as a species, the more culture we're going to present to communities. And it's all vegan, all made with love here locally on Maui, and you can get in local stores and on the Piri Farmers Market as well. Thank you, and mahalo.
All right, and let's have a hand for Anna and Steve for doing all the work to set this up. Thank you. So, we're actually, this is a special day for Madeline. I mean, Madeline, can you stand? Let's give a hand to Madeline. She's my wonderful spouse and traveling partner. And she's also the artist of all the paintings you'll be seeing up here. They'll be actually they're available as prints afterwards if you want to bring any one of these home as a signed and numbered museum quality sheet plate prints. We still have a few that we'd rather not have to carry on the plane back to San Francisco. We have a few books as well left also. But I just want to say this is a special day for us because we left on October 8th on basically heading east. So we flew to Europe first and gave lectures in Europe, in Spain, Switzerland, and primarily in England. And then we continued on from there after about, I guess, 2 weeks to India. And we actually did the very first nationwide lecture tour promoting veganism that's ever happened in India. And the Indian vegan movement is, in many ways, it's just beginning. They have a great vegetarian kind of scene, but veganism is really small. So we were there, we gave lectures in 10 cities in about a 2-week period. And then we traveled from there to China, and were there, I think, for about 3 weeks doing lectures around China, as well as Hong Kong and Taiwan. Great to see the grassroots movement growing like mad in China, and both mainland China as well as Hong Kong and Taiwan. And then finally, we've been here, I think, for maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks. And we'll be going, and we're flying back tonight. So this is our 75th event tonight. 65 days. Thank you. I remember when we started, I wasn't sure how it was all going to go. There was all these warnings. People in India said, and China also said, you know, no one's ever done this kind of incredibly intense. We're doing 2 or 3 events a day in a different city every day, taking the train or the bus or the plane or something, and giving all these lectures. And usually people, you know, get sick and have to quit the tour, but we didn't have any trouble actually, and it went really well. And so I'm just delighted and very grateful to so many, literally thousands of people in these countries who work very hard at the grassroots level to promote the events and make them very successful. We got a lot of media coverage, both social media as well as mainstream media coverage. A lot of the big newspapers, radio and television stations in India and China were reporting on the events that we were doing and getting out literally to millions of people. So more than ever, I feel strongly the importance of grassroots activism. It's great, I think, to have the larger groups, but I think that where the real power is what we're doing right now, getting together, finding out who makes the vegan food, supporting each other, talking to each other face to face, and sharing the message and the beauty of the message, and learning how to, you know, from each other, how to create community, how to make delicious vegan food, what the many dangers of animal agriculture actually are, many benefits of moving to a plant-based way of living are, and to work together, not only to understand this better ourselves, but to share these ideas with other people. And there's no better way to build a movement than like this, through the grassroots movement. And so we don't plan on stopping. We'll be going back for just a few weeks, and then we're starting a 3-month tour for the southern part of the United States. And I think we live in such critical times. I don't feel like it's possible to sit still when the planet, in many ways, is burning up. And but really the culprit, in many ways, is animal agriculture. This is not reported in the mass media. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I just did this, actually, a really nice interview with the local public TV station here in Maui, talking about the 2 reasons that we don't hear about these ideas. One is that the mass media, the mainstream media, really doesn't want to cover these ideas because it goes contrary to what the large corporations want us to know. And I understand this viscerally because I was raised actually in a newspaper family, and my father actually built up a whole chain of newspapers in the Boston, Massachusetts area while I was growing up. And I learned just sitting around the table that you do not run news stories that the advertisers don't like, because the advertisers will then just stop advertising with you and they'll advertise, somebody else. So that's why with the media, whether it's mainstream, television or whatever it is, print media, we're getting basically the version of reality that comes from what I call the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, banking complex. The large financial and corporate institutions, chemical companies and pharmaceutical industry, and meat industry and fast food industry. It's not in their best interest for the people to really understand the consequences of animal agriculture. And then the other thing is that most of the actual people, when we leave here and go out into the world, would also rather not know. You've probably seen that if you go up to someone and say, would you like to know where your bacon comes from? What do they usually say? No, don't tell me, I want to enjoy my bacon, just keep it to yourself. So for that reason, it's somewhat difficult to share this message. You would think that people would want to know where their food comes from. This is food. Food is our most intimate connection with nature. It's so important to be healthy and to have a healthy world. Food is the foundation, really, of any society, and yet we live in this kind of bizarre world where people don't want to know. They'll rather just eat anything, and especially if it's an animal-based food, and not really be aware of the consequences of that for their own health, for the animals, for ecosystems, for wildlife, for hungry people, for slaughterhouse workers, for future generations, and really for a whole mandala of interconnected consequences that are devastating, actually. So for this reason, I think what we're doing by going to farmers markets and opening vegan restaurants, it's great to hear about that new restaurant here. And also I want to put a word out to the Living Aloha magazine and Carlos Garcia. There he is. Give a big hand to Carlos. He's also working so hard to help share and promote the vegan message here of compassion and sustainability and health, and actually creating a rare type of media. Living Aloha magazine is not supported by the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical complex at all. In fact, you won't even take ads from people who are promoting violence towards animals. And so I think this kind of integrity is really rare in our world today, and it's a great service. And it goes out to a lot of people who would not know otherwise. So I think this is the kind of thing, is to just do our best, each one of us, to make an effort to understand the consequences of animal agriculture, and then to do the best we can to live our lives in alignment with this understanding. So I'd like to, again, just draw your attention to the paintings that'll be changing as I'm speaking here. And we can look into the eyes of these beings, and I think in many ways they're far more articulate than I can ever be, because these are the animals. Like, we were just in Africa, and it's really quite sad, honestly, to see now that Kentucky Fried Chicken and Burger King are moving into Africa, the onslaught of wildlife is really taking up. They're just wiping out giraffes and zebras and lions and hippopotamus, and really all the large animals in Africa are going right, unfortunately, into extinction if we don't change that quickly, because once you start bringing animal foods into a culture in a big way, Africa's basically been based on plant-based eating. People basically eat rice and millet and vegetables and very, very, very little meat. I mean, compared to the US, where we have a per capita consumption of around over 200 pounds per person, in Africa it's been around 10 to 15 pounds per person per year. And so I think now that this is changing, these corporations are going in. Elephants and zebras and giraffes are becoming the enemy. They're trampling soybean. Monsanto's moving in, of course, and trampling soybean and corn crops. And they want to kill them all, get rid of them, get rid of the lions. Now they're a threat to our big, huge pig farms. They're creating all this stuff. So it's really important, I think, for us as Americans. If we're living here in this country, in the United States, we're still in many ways the model that everyone wants to follow. People still, we travel all over the world. We've lectured actually in Africa. World Peace Diet, since it's been translated in all these languages, we get invited to speak in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, North, South America, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, all over Asia. And everywhere, people still love Americans and American culture, you know, in spite of all of our violence towards animals and in many ways towards people. But I think if we human beings, I mean, we people who are living in the United States, if we can model moving toward a plant-based vegan way of living, that's one of the greatest gifts our culture can give to the world. So that's why I think as Americans, our voice is amplified enormously. And other countries are really going, in many ways, I think, going ahead of us. You know, Taiwan, I would say, is probably the most #1 vegan country in the world. Their vegan movement is incredibly well organized, and they cooperate, and they have over 1,000 restaurants in that little island of Taiwan that are either vegetarian or vegan. There's a lot of vegan activism going on there. Also in China and many other countries, actually. So England, of course, as you know. So I think as living in this culture, if we can just be creative, just find ways that we can share this message. And so, so basically, when we look into nature, when we look into our society, when we look into our individual health, we see that the underlying yearning, I think, that we have is for health, right? We want to be healthy physically, we want to be healthy psychologically, we want to be, live in a healthy society with healthy relationships, with justice and equality. We want to live on a healthy planet, you know, with nice clean air and clean water, and healthy forests and oceans and fishes and birds and so forth. And we want to be healthy, I would say, on a spiritual level or ethical level. We want to have a feeling of purpose in our life and a feeling of dignity and of a connection with something beyond just being a material object, a commodity that we sell on the market to make money and just consume something. What I've discovered is that these 5 levels of health, environmental, cultural, physical, psychological, and spiritual, are all not only the most valuable things for us, they're all attacked and harmed horribly, just really destroyed in many ways by animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is presented to us from the time we're little infants as some kind of benevolent activity, right? It's like meat is real food for real people, provides protein, dairy products provide calcium, you've got to have this or you'll probably die. And yet when we look at it more carefully, we realize that it can be very troubling to do this, that the people that we trust completely, like my own mother and my father and my doctor and my minister and my government agency, we think they would all tell us the truth. But it's not the truth. Unfortunately, we have to really come to terms with this, that animal agriculture basically is providing a massive disservice to our world because it's providing products that are very harmful for us to eat, that are extraordinarily inefficient to produce. It takes ridiculous amounts of land and water and petroleum and pollution to feed someone on a meat and dairy very standard American diet compared to someone eating a plant-based diet. So in terms of just environmental devastation and cultural devastation, because we realize that every year, for example, no one argues this, people who are experts in this field do not argue that we grow enough food to feed everyone. We're growing enough food, I mean, that's a beautiful thing to think about that. The main message tonight I want to share in the really short time that we have is a positive message of joy and liberation and kindness and happiness and abundance and health, that we human beings are basically wise and intelligent, that we are all given this wonderful gift of a physical body that does not require any animals to suffer in any way to feed us. Right? We don't need, there's no nutrients that we have to attack and confine animals in order to get. That this is a gift. And we also have been given the gift of living on a planet that is beautiful. How many of you have noticed by now that the Earth is beautiful? Anybody? Yeah, I mean, if you don't notice it here, you won't notice it anywhere. I mean, it's like slapping in the face with the beauty, you know, it's so beautiful. And you would think that just the presence of the beauty that is around us, because nature itself is beautiful, if we're not living in some human-made construction where we can't get out of it, but you know, being connected with nature, we're connected with the beauty of the earth, and that sense of beauty creates within us an urge to protect the beauty for ourselves and for future generations and for animals and so forth, and the beauty of other animals. But also, besides being beautiful, the earth is abundant. And I think we are given this lie that somehow that there's not enough, that the earth just cannot provide enough for us. This is too many, you know. And really, no one who studies this ever says that. We're growing enough food every year to feed between 9 and 10 billion people at least. We have about 7.5 billion people, so we could feed everyone. The problem is that really 75 to 80% of the grain, the corn, the soy, the legumes that we're growing, instead of feeding to people, we're feeding to imprisoned animals, and they create 4 things essentially: saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying and inflammatory animal protein, which is really not healthy for us to be eating, and enormous quantities of sewage, which is basically unregulated. 130 times as much sewage is created by animals than by human beings in the United States livestock, and it's far more toxic than human sewage. You know how well human sewage is regulated, and the animal sewage is virtually unregulated because the animal industries don't want to be regulated, and so they're not regulated. They don't want to be, so that's it. They basically decide because they have such a powerful lobby. And so, and besides that, they also create a lot of methane and nitrous oxide, and these are in many ways far more powerful in destabilizing our climate as well, and cutting down rainforests to grow soybeans, and overfishing the oceans to catch fish, not just to feed to people, but to feed to the animals. Cows are eating huge amounts of fish now because scientists discovered that if you feed cows fish, it boosts their milk production and fattens them up, so fish meal is being fed to cows, to pigs, to chickens. And these animals are being exploited, and one way of exploiting them is to feed them food that's not designed for them to eat. This is a very important point that I don't usually bring up, but I'm going to mention it here because I feel that you are advanced students. So this is the advanced course here. You know, basically that if we see how cows are being abused, for example, and exploited, because even though they're designed to eat grass, when you feed them just grass, they don't give that much milk, and they don't fatten up very well. So we have to enrich their feed, right? Make it richer. So they enrich the feed of cows with soy and corn that they're not designed to eat. They're not designed to eat that kind of grain. It makes them very sick. It causes E. coli, which makes them sick and makes us sick. If you eat E. coli, you know, that's one of the worst things you can do is get E. coli. But, and it causes cancer, you know, a lot of problems, really. They're really not designed for that, but they don't stop there in the enriching process. They enrich the food even more and feed them meat, right? Cows are eating a lot of meat. They feed them fish meal, like I said, and I won't even tell you, dogs and cats that are ground up, you know, where does it end up? Fed to cows. And other, you know, slaughterhouse byproducts are fed to cows. So are cows natural carnivores, do you think? Have you seen cows trying to catch fish in a local stream? No, but it's standard procedure to feed cows a lot of meat, especially fish. And again, it's not because farmers are benevolent and just want to give them a nice, rich diet. You know, it makes them very sick. They're alive long enough before they slaughter them very young. Of course, all the animals die when they're still basically children in human terms, or infants even. I mean, chickens that would normally live 20 years are killed when they're only 7 weeks old. They fatten them up so fast with hormones and feed and breeding and all the lighting schedules and all this stuff. So the exploitation of these animals, but you have to realize, anyone who's actually eating any animal foods, if I'm eating meat or dairy products or eggs, not only am I taking out my wallet, and this is the engine, I mean, this is the engine of the whole thing. This drives everything. This is the voting booth where the votes always get counted. So if I'm taking out my wallet and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs because of me, I'm the one who is actually guilty in a sense of causing the killing. It's not the slaughterhouse workers. I mean, it's the people who pay for this. So when we do this, we're causing this terrible suffering that these animals go through. And I think this is the underlying message that we in our society have not been able to come to terms with, that the exploitation that we cause ourselves to these animals boomerangs to us, and we are ourselves exploited. And this is something that's maybe hard to accept for most people who are eating animal foods, but just as cows are not designed to eat animal foods, they're being exploited, and that's why they're eating animal foods. We also are not designed to eat animal foods, and if we're eating animal foods, we're also being exploited, and we will more than likely spend a lot of money and suffer a lot in hospitals because of liver disease, kidney disease, heart disease, breast, prostate, and colon cancer, diverticulitis, Alzheimer's, and dementia, and autoimmune diseases of various kinds. All this stuff is absolutely linked to animal agriculture. You know Michael Greger's best-selling book, you probably heard about it, it's How Not to Die. He basically takes the top 16 causes of death and hospitalization and misery and disease, those top 16 diseases we have, and out of those top 16, 15 of them are caused directly by diets that are high in animal foods. There's only one that isn't. You know which one isn't? Accidents. Everything else is animal-based eating. So really, if we care about nobody else, if we don't care about animals, we don't care about hungry people, we don't care about the poor slaughterhouse workers that have to stab animals all day, if we don't care about the environment, if we don't care about future generations, we really don't care about anyone, we only care about ourselves, you still got to go vegan. Because really, I mean, and actually it's a good thing to care about our own health. I mean, one of the greatest gifts we can give to others is to be healthy. Really, right? I mean, really, a beautiful world is possible when we're healthy. So each one of us can eat in a way, and I think health is not only obviously driven by food. I mean, that's one aspect, but there's the quality of our life, the quality of our thoughts, and how much, the quality of our exercise and our relationships, and all these other things. Food is extremely important, but also if we have a mission in our life. So I think, looking at health in the big picture, environmental health, cultural health, physical health, and seeing that animal agriculture is a direct attack. I've already explained that, I think, a little bit about the environmental devastation of animal agriculture, the overfishing, the destruction of rainforests, the destruction of climate stability, the overuse. I mean, according to the United Nations, basically, it's 30 to 1 in terms of water. In other words, someone eating a standard American diet uses 30 times the amount of fresh water as someone eating a plant-based diet, especially organic plant-based diet. And in general, you could say, if you want to be very conservative, 10 to 1. But still, 10 to 1 in terms of petroleum use, in terms of pollution, and in terms of deforestation and ocean destruction. Think of that. It's not just 2 to 1. I mean, someone moves to a plant-based diet, we cut the amount of environmental devastation by 10-fold. This is amazing. This is such good news, right? We can really dramatically shrink humanity's environmental footprint as we move to a plant-based diet. This should be something, I think, that every newspaper, magazine, and television station is reporting on and encouraging, and it's starting to happen. I just read an article this morning in The Guardian that they're saying we've just got to impose a tax on meat because it's so destructive. So I think gradually, as we have more grassroots awareness of this, this will change. The same thing with culture. If we want to have a healthy society, you can't have a healthy society with chronic hunger and food shortages, which lead to war and conflict, which leads to massive weapons build-up and conflict. And also to remember the workers. We have a whole class of people who just stab animals all day, rape animals on what are called rape racks, impregnate them against their will, steal their babies, kill them, steal their milk, steal their eggs, mutilate them, hit them, electroshock them. That's, can you imagine having that as a job? But we have whole armies of people that have to do that because, why? Because I take out my wallet and I pay them to do that. So I'm causing that, and these workers have the highest rates of suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, spousal abuse. So the trauma of animal agriculture goes not only to the animals who are absolutely terrified and horribly abused their entire lives before they're killed, but also to the workers, also to the wild, free-living animals. I don't have time to go into that, but just think of how the free-range horses are all being rounded up and killed now, and wolves, coyotes, bobcats, prairie dogs, and all the animals are being attacked and killed because ranchers don't want any other animal except their cows and sheep and goats on the land. So it's a war against nature. Animal agriculture is an absolute war against nature and against human beings. And we have to really take the mask off and see it for what it is, and not let anyone fool us about this any longer, because this, we will not have a world for our children if we continue down this path. I've talked a little bit about our physical health, and I myself, I always say the smartest thing I ever did, besides marrying Madeline, was going vegan. And I did it 37 years ago. Before that, I went vegetarian before that, about 5 years before that. And it really creates a foundation for physical health, and I think also psychological and spiritual health. And I want to say just a couple of words about that. And I think, we have a few more minutes. So, look at these animals. These are the beings that we're talking about. They're looking to their eyes. We can see that there's someone there. There's a subject looking out at us and hoping that we don't horribly abuse them, because we have complete power over them. They're in our hands, right? They're just, we have such, can you imagine being in the hands of a species that has total power over you. And you would hope that the species that has total power over you will look at you with eyes that recognize that you're someone, right? Wouldn't you hope so? And yet, what if this super powerful species looks at you and values you by how much you weigh? Because you're just a piece of meat. And you say, but I can do yoga, doesn't that count? No. Well, I can play the violin, I can paint, I can sing and dance, doesn't that count? No. Because all you are is a piece of meat. You're just an object, a thing I'm going to destroy and chew up and eat. We are that species. Can you believe how crude and completely devoid of wisdom, clarity, decency, nobility? I mean, who are we to do that? To live this and to put billions of animals in our hand and just crush them with no mercy at all. And torture them and abuse them as if they don't matter at all. How many of you have had a companion animal, for example, like a dog, cat, some of you, bird, that you know there's a being in there, and her interests are to her as important as my interests are to me. So how do we live in this kind of, how do we tolerate actually living in a society set up at its living core of doing this to millions of animals every day, and eating, and that, we don't just take out our wallets and pay for it and cause it, we then eat it. Think of that, we actually eat the pain and misery and violence that we force onto these animals and feed it to their children, to our children. And then we pray for peace. And then we think we can build a world of justice. Who are we fooling? Why does nobody talk about this? Why is this not on the news every night? Why is this completely hidden and undiscussed? How is it possible, really? I mean, you know, we have the Buddhist teaching. I remember going to China. People have understood this for over 1,000, probably 2,000 years at least. And we think we're superior to those old cultures, right? We're superior to them. We kill more and destroy more than ever because of animal agriculture. And the point to understand here, really I think it's critical, is that it's not that we're bad people. It's not that we get up in the morning and think, oh, I just want to cause suffering. I'm going to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken. I'm going to make a chicken supper today. You know, we don't do that. We're just like, I got to get to the office. I don't have much time. I got to grab something to eat and get to work, you know. So we're just unconscious. That's it. And we've also all been wounded by being born into a society where as little infants we had to sit at a table and not just watch the adults eat the flesh and secretions of horribly abused animals. Pretty soon they make us eat it too. And so when that happens, our heart just gets shut down. And it happened to me. I mean, I know we've all gone through that. I was the older brother. I remember when I was probably about that same time, about 7, I remember I was feeding my little sister. She was sitting in the high chair, and my mother said, you can feed your little sister. You know, she's a little tiny little thing, and I was feeding her, and she said, make sure she eats her protein. And of course, what did she always do? She kept spitting it out. You know, I said, come on, here comes the protein. And I finally had to make it like an airplane. Here comes the protein. She'd go, spit it out. I was forcing it down her throat because I wanted her not to die of a protein deficiency. It would be my fault. I didn't know what it was. It was a piece of chicken or liver or whatever it was. But I just thought I was doing the right thing because my mother thought it was the right thing to make sure she got her protein and her calcium and all these things. I remember when I was about 7, around the same time, I think I started questioning. I said, Mom, the kind of food we're eating, this food, it's like it was a lot of meat and dairy, but to me it was just food. I said, this food, is this human food all over the world? Is this what people are eating everywhere? And she said, yeah, this is basic human food. And then she left, and then she came back, and I said, okay, thanks. And then she came back, and she said, well, it's not completely true. There are vegetarians. This is this long new word. I always loved long new words. What's a vegetarian? And she said, vegetarian. You know, I wouldn't worry about it. You're probably never going to meet one. And it was kind of like this very academic. She said, I'm a lot older than you are. I never met one. And then she said, I don't know where they get their protein, you know. So I had this image in my mind suddenly of these poor, very rare people who drag themselves through the dirt, begging for spare protein from someone, and that's, you know, the poor sorry sops that they must be. And so nothing in my world could ever illuminate me in any way that there was any other way of living. So the thing is, it's just that we're born into an obsolete food system that not only is destroying our world, we're eating foods that are toxic to us, and it's well understood. They do when someone, like a little baby dies or something, or I mean not a baby, but someone maybe 8 or 9 years old even, and they do an autopsy, they're finding already that they have the beginnings of heart disease, you know, at 8 or 9 years old, eating the standard American diet. So this is very toxic to us physically, but we're also eating toxic attitudes growing up, you know, so we're eating the attitude of with every meal of disconnectedness, you know, that basically just don't make the connection between what you're eating and how it got onto your plate. Don't think about that. What are you eating? We're eating bacon. I didn't know what it was. I was the first one at the table when my mother said, we're having bacon this morning. I was right there. I loved all that. You know, that's fat and salt, and yum, yum, yum. They're really good. And if she had told me what it was, I would have never wanted to eat. If she had said it's, you know, an animal, she's kicking at a pig, she's kicking and screaming, and they're cutting her throat, and I would have said, oh no, you want me to actually, I don't want to hear about it, you want me to eat it? You know, I didn't know what it was, and I think we don't know, and then when we find out, in a sense, it's too late, but we learn with every meal to master the art of disconnecting, of staying shallow, of not caring, not looking deeply, not feeling deeply, not listening deeply, just trusting authorities. Yeah, that's just trust the authorities. That's what animal agriculture teaches us. It teaches us not to rely on our own wisdom, not to rely on our own feelings, our own intelligence, our own empathy, our own intuition. Shut all that down and just follow orders. That's basically the message. Just don't think, follow orders. That works very well if you want to have a society where people will buy whatever you advertise and believe whatever news you want to tell them is news. What veganism is, essentially, it's not veganism. Veganism is just coming home to our heart, to our wisdom, to our intuition, and seeing beings when we see beings, and not abstractions or commodities, and then making the connection. And the ability to make connections is the definition of intelligence. If you have a society where people are eating animal foods, you have a society where people are systematically having their intelligence stripped away, where the cultural intelligence is being stripped away. We don't have intelligence in our society. If we had intelligence, we would not be using most of our resources to destroy everything. So this is animal. If you want to eat beef and dairy products, that's what's going to happen. Unfortunately, it's giving us, not only is animal agriculture actually the driving engine behind war and environmental destruction and injustice and so forth, it also, unfortunately, creates the inner mentality in the people where we're powerless to change our course. We can't deal with it because we can't make connections. We don't have the intelligence and the empathy because animal agriculture shuts that down. And so we just, as Einstein said, we drift toward unparalleled catastrophe. We're just drifting along because we have blinders slapped on us and we just follow orders and go along and just believe what they tell us. Every meal is teaching us. That's the subtext of every meal. And anthropologists understand that the way any culture transmits its values from generation to generation is through rituals, and the main ritual in any society are meals, when people eat food together. So looking deeply into our meals, that's what we're looking at. We have to look at the subconscious programming, the ritualized, indoctrinated behavior that we not only learn, but we eat it. It becomes the very cells of our body. And the same thing with the attitude of might makes right. Every meal is teaching us that the strong dominate the weak, that those who are more powerful exploit the weak, that those who have privilege, who are in the elite, can use those who are lower. And so again, we're eating this every day. And so then we go out and we say we want peace, we want justice. It's never going to happen. We're eating the opposite of that. We're just exploiting and oppressing and abusing billions of animals who don't want to be exploited and oppressed, and we're fighting against exploitation. I mean, how ridiculous is that? That's what we're doing, because we don't make the connections, and we are, again, wounded by being raised in this kind of society where the violence is so massive and so unrecognized that it just goes, it's just what Carl Jung called the shadow. It's what we are, but what we just don't see. And he said the bigger the shadow is, the harder it is to see. This is the big one, and it's completely invisible for most people. It took me a long time to figure out that we live in a herding culture. Our whole culture is organized around confining and eating animals, and killing them, mutilating them. And yet it's all hidden. So, yeah, and the other aspect of the inner program, there's many other aspects, but I'll just mention three. The third one is the domination of the sacred feminine dimension of life. You have to really understand that animal agriculture is not just killing animals, it's about sexually abusing animals on a massive scale, and no female animal ever gets out of it. When they're all impregnated against their will, their babies are stolen, and they're impregnated again, their babies are stolen. This is heartbreaking. Madeline and I have traveled a lot. We've gone to slaughterhouses, we've been to stockyards, we've been to auctions, and we've been to factory farms, and I've heard dairy, I've heard the mother cows bawling all night after their babies are stolen, even on nice organic farms. It's the same violence and brutality. There's no escaping it. It's an absolute, I mean, our heart knows if there's something that we should not mess with, it's mothers loving their babies and nursing their babies. That, in animal agriculture, that's the thing you've got to specifically attack, because profits come from stealing the babies, killing the babies, and just getting as much meat, as much milk, as much eggs, as much money, product as you possibly can, so you want to impregnate them as fast as you can. And so this whole system has created the kind of system, culture we live in. And in the World Peace Diet, I talk about the fact that 10,000 years ago, for the very first time, we started to own animals as property for food, and what is Iraq today, and how that revolution, the herding revolution, which created herderism, I coined the word, herderism, which is the basic mentality in our society of dominating and exploiting animals, that created for the very first time a wealthy elite class. The kings, they talked about the kings in ancient Greek mythology and ancient Bible and all these ancient writings, the Epic of Gilgamesh and so forth. And these kings are rich and powerful because they own the most livestock, right? Livestock are wealth. The old Latin word capita means head, as in head of sheep and goats and cows. So we have the rising of a capitalistic system based on a wealthy elite that owns the means of production of wealth, which are livestock, and then they go to war. There had never been war before. The first word for war is the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, that means the desire for more cows. So we have the arising of war, then following with that, the arising of slavery, because whoever loses the war becomes physically the property of those who win the war. So the animals become the property. That's the whole point of going to war, is to get more wealth, get more capital, get more livestock. That was wealth. And then the people also become wealth. You own slaves, those are wealth. And then you impregnate them to get more slaves. So this whole mistreatment of animals goes to mistreatment of humans. And what I've discovered in my research, unfortunately, is that whatever we've done to animals, sooner or later, we've done to each other. So it's really high time, I think, for us to understand how this has come about, how that society that rose up back then in the Eastern Mediterranean with the domination of animals, and men also beginning to see females as mere breeders to be used for profit, for pleasure, for children, and so forth. This patriarchal, very warlike society spread from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Northern Mediterranean, to Central Asia, to Europe, to the Americas, to Africa. It's been spreading, and it's still spreading today through many of the institutions and corporations, the big financial institutions and banks, the IMF, the World Bank, Monsanto, Cargill, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King. All these very powerful organizations, they get their wealth from this whole system. We're born into that today. We're born into the same system. We're all wounded by the same system. The good news is, I think, that finally, at last, we can begin to wake up out of it, recognize it, and then I think instead of so much fighting against it, I think in a way it's smarter to just create an alternative that makes the existing system obsolete, because it is obsolete. So that's what we see happening. We see, like I say, alternative publications, alternative vegan restaurants and videos and books and coaching and all the things that we can create to help. And I just think the most important thing is to really become more self-sufficient if we can, food-wise, growing organic, plant-based foods, feeding each other, making enough to understand the issues, and then creatively creating communities, because I think that's the big thing, communities. The only reason anyone eats animal foods is because of the communities we're raised in, right? That's it. When we leave here and we see people eating animal foods, it's because of the community that they're raised in. Like, that was true for me. My mother, my father, my teacher, everybody. So I ate meat and dairy too. I couldn't help it. But it was because I actually saw another example. I traveled right after college, and I thought I'd go on a spiritual pilgrimage, meditating and following Ramana Maharshi and studying Zen. I learned about Pure Land Buddhism when I was only 20 years old, and I thought it was a great thing. But I remember doing meditating, and I ended up at this, for a while, my brother and I had a community in Tennessee called The Farm, which in 1975 was the largest hippie commune in the world. And they were all vegetarian, 1,000 people. And they had about 200 children that were vegetarian. They weren't even vegetarian, they were vegan, actually. No one heard of the word vegan back in 1975, but they didn't eat meat or dairy or eggs. And so there I was with this community, And I found out why. They talked about the food shortages and war. They wanted to create peace, so they were eating lower on the food chain so there would be enough food for everyone. And they told me about some of the cruelty and abuse of animals, and so that was it. I never ate meat again in my life since that day. I heard about that in 1975, and I found out years later when I met Madeline that in the same month and year, she also decided in Switzerland to never eat meat in her life, also. That's like 42 years ago. And then a few years later, in 1980, I became a vegan, and a few years after that, I shaved my head and went over to a Buddhist monastery in South Korea. There I was meditating from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. It was total silence, sitting on the floor, full lotus, and you know, just for months on end. And I remember realizing that I was in a community that had been practicing what we would call veganism for 900 years, you know, since the 1100 or 10,000, 900 years, or 800 years maybe it was. And so I realized that what we call veganism is not a newfangled hippie idea. It's actually an ancient wisdom teaching, and that's what Madeline and I saw so clearly when we were in China recently, how these Buddhist monasteries that go back, you know, sometimes 1,500 years, they've been vegan for 1,500 years. They've been practicing plant-based living for ethical reasons, out of compassion for all living beings. And they invented, in many ways, a lot of the very first vegan meats and things for the wealthy patrons who would come. And they would want, wealthy patrons would want to have some fish and some chicken, so the monks would make plant-based fish and chicken to feed to them, you know. It's not 1,500 years ago they were doing this, you know. We're just catching up. So, and it was so great to see, you know, being where Confucius had his center, where he lived in Chufu in China. And one of the very first analogs of Confucius is the saying, he said very clearly, 500 BCE, you know, 500 years before the Common Era, he said, do not do to others what you would not want to have done to yourself. That sound familiar? Now this basic teaching is in all the world religions. The animals of the world are in our hands. We're doing to them what we would not want done to ourselves. What we're sowing, we're reaping. We sow seeds of obesity in them, we get obesity. We sow seeds of breakdown of the family, we get the breakdown of the family. We sow seeds of osteoporosis and cancer, and then we get osteoporosis and cancer. And, you know, we sow seeds of drug addiction, and then we get drug addiction. We have to realize if we're going to sow seeds and force other people into other beings, I mean, people, they are people, just like us, these animals, so-called animals. If we force these on these animal people, then we're going to have the same thing happening to us, and we're not going to be able to stop it. There's no way we can sow seeds of violence and reap something else. You sow carrots, you get carrots, you don't get cucumbers. We're sowing a lot of violence, and it's time for us to wake up out of the cultural trance, realize that we don't have to do that, and I think a glorious day is dawning. I think the resurrection of Sophia, the sacred feminine, is happening in our society. We are waking up, and so I want to just thank all of you for coming. I know that if you are here, it's really because you care. I think that's what we all share together, this feeling in our heart of caring. We care about our community, we care about this beautiful island, we care about our loved ones and ourselves, and we care about our future and our children. And so I think that bond that we share of caring is really the foundation of the world that we can create together. So I'm very grateful to all of you. I'm really grateful to Madeline for the art, and to everyone who helps organize this, for the little animals hiding away and hoping that we don't destroy them. And I think we have a beautiful future beckoning. It's really up to us, each one of us, to respond to the call that we hear, I think, from our heart, and do what we can to understand the message and then share the message creatively, whether it's through cooking classes, or writing, or dancing, or yoga, or just talking to people. Something, we all have abilities. We all have something we can do. We all have a short life, each one of us. I mean, maybe we get 80 or 90 years. Every day is precious. The years go by quickly. So hopefully we can wake up every morning with a feeling of gratitude and joy that we have another day to somehow contribute to the healing of our world and be part of the solution of all of this rather than be part of the problem. So much love to you all. I really appreciate your efforts, and I want to thank all of you. And maybe we can just close this time, and then we'll have a short Q&A, just a very short meditation. I think there was a meditation earlier, but I'd just like to maybe lead a short meditation and then play a short piece of music. And then when that's over, we can go ahead and open it up for questions. Much love. Thank you very much. Okay, so go ahead and just get comfortable in our seats for a brief meditation. And just close our eyes and just feel our connection with the earth, with heaven, with this beautiful planet, and with the infinite creative power. And feel our connection with each other and with all our loved ones. And see a web of light that connects all of us to each other here, and with all of our loved ones, and with all of the colleagues and friends and acquaintances that we have, and with all of their friends and acquaintances. So we see that as the web expands, it goes out and out and out and includes the whole human family and all living beings. And so we feel our connection with all living beings and the whole human family. And from our heart we send forth a wave of love and joy, gratitude and compassion and kindness to bless the entire web of relations. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be free. And may we continue to build a world that cares for everyone. And we give thanks knowing that we are part of an awakening of human consciousness in this beautiful earth, that we may celebrate our lives as we are intended to here. And we just allow the music now to flow out into our community as a blessing of peace and harmony for all life. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining together in this beautiful community that we have here this evening. Madeline, I'd like to turn it over to Madeline now for a second. And think if you have a question you'd like to share. We have, I would say, probably about time for 2 or 3 questions. Happy to respond to. We'll see how long each one takes, but yeah, okay.
Hi. The lecture is for free usually, but we happily take donations. It's a free will donation, and if you like to support our travels and our mission, so we are very grateful. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we'll just pass that around, and feel free if you can help out, that would be great. Oh, okay.
There's a red card in Acura that needs to move because of the musicians are moving. Oh.
Okay, so does anyone have a question you would like me to respond to in some way? We have a few minutes for questions, so that should be great. Yes.
Issue that we're having trouble figuring out. The couple that we're sitting next to, they just left. They have a beautiful, healthy dog that lives at their house that is vegan. We're working in that direction with the dog that lives at our house. Our cat, not so much. I'm sure the animals that go into a bag of dog food suffer just as much as the rest. Do you have any suggestions?
Okay, so the question is, companion animals, especially dogs and cats, if we're vegans, what do we feed to them? For the most part, I would highly recommend doing a little research on the internet. Dogs basically make very easy vegans. They do very well on vegan diet, plant-based diet. There's only, I think, 1 or 2 small subsets of breeds that perhaps have difficulty, but virtually 99.5% of all dogs will thrive on a totally plant-based diet. They really are omnivores, and all the nutrients that they need, they can get from plant-based sources. So you can either buy a vegan dog food like V-Dog or like Evolution or like, I don't know, there's a bunch of them actually, which you get through the mail, you don't have it shipped. Or you can find recipes online, make your own from lentils and carrots and things, that's cheaper. So that's dogs, and actually dogs, as I said, thrive. I think the oldest dog in the world is a vegan dog. Generally dogs get much healthier, their coats get much glossier, their breath smells better, they have more energy, they don't have all these problems that dogs typically have. Dog food and cat food are, if you really knew the disgusting ingredients in those, they're just the worst of all worst possibilities. So that's dogs. Cats are a little more problematic, however. Again, Evolution makes a vegan cat food. The founder of Evolution, I've talked to him a number of times, and he says, from his experience over 25 years now, actually 30 years, of feeding cats vegan cat food, that about 2/3 of cats will thrive on vegan cat food. So there are some that won't, but 2/3 will if you buy formulated cat food with taurine and all the other things. And there's more information on the internet. There's a woman who's a veterinarian named Armighty May. Her name is, it's very easy to find. If you just Google vegan veterinarian, she'll answer your questions for free, and so she's a good resource. You can go to her website if you have questions about how to feed dogs and cats vegan food. But it is very much possible, it's definitely possible for cats and for dogs and for most cats. That's a great question. Thank you. Anyone else have a question or concern they'd like to address? Yes.
This is a novice question, so just being honest.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on honey and bees and honey production?
Well, I think generally speaking, honey is based basically on the dairy model of a rape and kill operation. That's the basic model, and I don't think it's necessary. You know, I mean, I haven't had honey in a long time. 40 years it hasn't seemed to hurt me that much. And I think there's alternatives, you know, because bees right now are just really getting horribly abused by human beings. They're leaving the planet. They may go, you know, and I know there's all kinds of abuse that they go through. Honey is one of them. Using them, you know, for pollinating, of course, is another. Any kind of industrial use. But in general, you know, I could spend a lot of time talking about this. There's all kinds of different honey making procedures. There's large scale, there's small scale, there's backyard, you know, loving honey people. But in general, you know, you're saying, I want your honey, I'm taking it. You know, it's like, there's no, people say, well, I have an agreement with the bees. It's kind of like people in 1830 who owned slaves saying, I have an agreement with the slaves. You know, they said it's okay for me. You know, it's like, really? Did they give you your permission? Or is it you just taking it? You know, you're taking your permission. So I think we shouldn't use them. I mean, we don't need to. The bees, the honey, you know, they have to send queen bees through the mail, right? I mean, they said they send most of the bees through the mail. It's all done through the mail nowadays, for the most part. And a lot of them die on the way. Half of them die, or a third, very often, the queens. And then when they put a queen with a hive, very often the hive rejects the queen. So they get rid of that queen, get another queen until the hive accepts that queen, and then they do their thing and run around, collect all this honey. Then we take all of it or most of it, and then what do? We either let them live, or we kill them. Most of the time, they kill them and just get some more bees for the next, you know, in the spring and start over again. The bees collect the honey for themselves, not for us. So I just think there's maple syrup or rice syrup or agave or sorghum or coconut or stevia. We have stevia plants in our yard. We make a lot. You know, we use stevia. I think we should try to just respect these animals and just leave them alone, basically. And that has to do with chicken and eggs, and that has to do with dairy and cows and goats and sheep with dairy, and all the different ways we use animals for food. I think we need to really, as humanity, get much more humble and allow them sovereignty of their lives and not interfere with them and try to take what's not ours. Because that's the second Buddhist precept. First is not to kill, second is to not steal. And I think if we're taking milk or honey, we're stealing it. We don't really have their permission. Maybe if we evolve to the point where we're not abusing them anymore and have a whole different foundation, maybe the bees will say, okay, you can have some of our honey. I think right now, I think we're taking it. So that's what I think. Thank you. Yes?
Do you think plants can feel pain or suffering?
Well, that's a stretch. You know, it's kind of like, in a way. I mean, yeah, I mean, if they do, maybe they do. Sure, you could say, definitely they do, perhaps. You could, I mean, but most biologists will say that's ridiculous. But I'm not saying biologists know what they're talking about it. But if they do, I mean, let's say they do feel pain and suffering on some level, then for sure we should go vegan, you know, because certainly, I mean, biologists say that every year, if we go to a plant-based diet, we're saving between 100 and 150 trees, right? Trees, they're not just plants, I mean, they're trees, and we're saving habitat, we're reducing our environmental footprint dramatically. We're causing, if I'm eating meat or dairy, I'm eating huge amounts of plants, because these animals have to eat huge amounts of plants to fatten up. They need to eat that. So we're harvesting, we're cutting down forests and harvesting grain and corn and soybeans and all this stuff to feed all these animals and wasting all that. And so we're killing massive quantities of plants. So if we cared all about plants, we could easily move to a plant-based diet. And if we really care about it, I mean, we were just talking to a guy the other night, he said he lived only eating the fruits of plants that are given freely, because you know we know very clearly that if I'm eating apples, it's not like I'm going up and stabbing the tree. I'm actually spreading the apple seeds. You know, I'm helping the apple tree. And the same thing with all the fruits. You know, we're spreading the seeds. And most of the vegetables are fruits, right? Tomatoes and cucumbers and squashes. And think of all the pumpkins. And so we could, you know, if you wanted, you could live all on, get plenty of starch, cooked squashes and breadfruits, and you could live on that, and really the only blessing, there's no way you could say you're causing any harm to plants if we eat that kind of food. But I think really on a deeper level, we all know that you can't equate the suffering of animals with plants. Like for example, if someone were to say get arrested because they went over to their neighbor's dog who was barking and just take out a knife and stab the dog to death, killed the dog, and went to court and said to the judge, you know, Your Honor, I mean, to me, stabbing and killing a dog and stabbing a tomato, it's all the same thing. And he wouldn't just go to jail, he'd probably go to an institution for the criminally insane. Right? We know that a dog is not a tomato. If someone kills a dog or a human being and says it's like a tomato, you know, I mean, plants don't feel pain the way, you know, these animals are endowed with a central nervous system just like we have, and fish also have a central nervous system just like we have. For us to say they don't feel pain is, well, it's completely absurd. Yeah, plants do not have a central nervous system that we have, and they're not mobile. So I think it's a little bit like when women were looking for the right to vote, people say, well, do you think horses should have the right to vote too? So I think, you know, we see very clearly that plants are to be loved and respected, and going vegan is the best way to do that. Anyone else have any questions or anything, any concerns or anything? Yes?
Does your book offer supporting evidence that human physiology actually benefits from plant-based diet, unlike what we've been taught that we must eat protein with animals?
Yes. Yeah, the book, I have a whole chapter called The Intelligence of Human Physiology, and that's exactly what it does. It just lays out the entire science, which is at this point totally massive, that our physiology is designed to run on plant-based carbohydrates and fiber and minerals and vitamins and proteins that come from plants. That plant-based protein is far higher quality than animal-based protein. I can talk a long time about that. I can see people getting hot, and so thank you very much. So I think I'll maybe wrap it up here. Yeah.
So if you want to take Will Tuttle home, what you can do is get the Living Aloha magazine, and there's a beautiful article that he wrote. So make sure that you get a copy of the Living Aloha magazine, and that's the way you get Will Tuttle home.
That's another way. Thank you so much. I also want to say I think it's time for us to wrap it up. It's pretty hot, and we have to get to the airport and fly overnight flight back to San Francisco. So I just want to say we did unfortunately sell out of these books. We don't have any left. This one has already been paid for by somebody. But we do have these two books, which I highly recommend if you're interested in getting these teachings. This is called Circles of Compassion, Essays Connecting Issues of Justice, and it goes really deeply into social justice issues, all kinds, racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, environmental sustainability, and its connection to animal agriculture. I'm the editor of this book, and I chose 29 other authors, and I put this together. And so we have this book available, and also a brand new book just came out, Your Inner Islands, The Keys to Intuitive Living. And it's got that kind of Hawaiian feel to it. So, but it's based on my PhD research at Berkeley, which was actually, I was nominated as the best dissertation at Berkeley that year, 1988, I guess it was, on developing intuition in adults. And I think intuition, this inner wisdom that we have, is really the foundation in many ways of vegan living. And so we have this book which has many exercises and teachings about developing intuition. So this one is only $15, the other one's $20. I really am hoping not to carry these on the plane, because we've done this whole tour of, whatever, 40 different cities around the world with no luggage, just carry-on bags. And I think I don't want to have to finally have luggage. So please see us afterwards. We also have some CDs of original piano music, and Madeline does have some of her paintings that we would love, if you're interested, if you'd like to bring them home, we can, and really we'll give you special deals on these things too, because we really don't want to carry them. So if you're interested, see us afterwards. I'm happy to answer more questions in the back, and happy to sign books, and happy to give you a hug. And much love to you all. I really appreciate all the efforts that you're making here on Maui, and keep up the great work. We really appreciate it, and much love to you all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining together in this beautiful community that we have here this evening.